You're listening to the DolphinsTalk.com podcast network. Welcome to Dolphins Talk Weekly, your one-stop audio breakdown of all of this week's Miami Dolphins news. Now, here is your host, Kevin Dern.
This episode of Dolphins Talk Weekly is brought to you by Caneswear. Caneswear is the place to go for officially licensed apparel for the Miami Dolphins, Miami Heat, the Hurricanes, Florida Panthers, and all the professional and college teams in South Florida. Looking for the latest jersey, a birthday gift, or the newest hat to hit the market of your favorite South Florida team? Check out Caneswear for their overwhelming selection of sports apparel. Located at 2655 South University Drive in Davie, Florida, Caneswear has it all. Not in South Florida? No worries. Visit Caneswear.com to shop their inventory from the comfort of your home, and they'll ship it right to you. International fans, too. Caneswear.com is the spot that Miami fans shop. That's Caneswear.com. Caneswear.com. And welcome into what feels like forever ago, another Victory Monday Dolphins Talk Weekly podcast. I am your host, Kevin Dern. Please give me a follow on Twitter at KevinMD4. Follow the show at DolphinsTalk.com, Spotify, iTunes, Podbean, wherever else you listen to your podcasts. We're there. Make sure you check out the articles on DolphinsTalk.com. And the Dolphins somehow, some way, decided to not keel over and go belly up this season, and they won the rock fight 15-10 over the New England Patriots yesterday, as I record this Monday night, by a final score of 15-10. And go into a bye week at 2-3. Still not a very good football team, and they have not looked very good. But there are really kind of three things that they can hang their hat on so far this year that I think you can carry forward. And I think we'll talk about a little bit about the New England game and what I thought stood out, comparatively speaking, especially compared to the Tennessee game, which I did not record a podcast after. And then we'll kind of look at where they go. Obviously, you have an odd number of games now, but essentially your bye week is coming at the quarter pole of the season. And I think it's a good time for the Miami Dolphins. I think there's sort of a set of parallel narratives, and the guys at the Same Old Dolphins show put this out usually every Monday or Tuesday after a Dolphins game. What's the one word that you would describe your feelings as, as far as the Dolphins go? And sometimes I'm sarcastic with it, sometimes I'm realistic about it, and the word I chose for today was emulsive, which means to have a body of liquid with another body of liquid inside it. I feel like that's sort of what the Dolphins are in terms of narratives, and we'll cover all that in the show. Let's start with the Patriots game. I think broad strokes version, not that the score is indicative of it, but you got a better game plan, a better script than what you had against Tennessee. I mean, Miami kind of ran away with it in all facets, 24 first downs to 15. Neither team was good on third down, but the Patriots were just a paltry 4 of 13. They were also 0 of 1 on fourth downs. You had 20 more plays. You had about 80 more total yards on the same number of drives. Fewer penalties, although still 6 penalties is too much. Almost had the Patriots by 10 full minutes of time of possession. About 20 seconds off there from having a 10 full minute advantage. And I think what's even more interesting is you win that game losing the turnover battle 0-2. And quite frankly, had the Dolphins lost that game, I wasn't sure what I would talk about. I could not record a podcast last week after Monday Night Football because we had some shit hit the fan at work, and I got wrapped up in some projects, and by the time I finally had some free time to record, it was already Friday, so didn't quite get the opportunity to give my thoughts on the Titans game, but, I trust most of Dolphin Nation probably felt about the same way I did after getting embarrassed at home in primetime yet again. But, big picture, I talked about this after the loss to Buffalo. When you knew Tua was going to be out, I said the goal is to get yourself to 3-3. Now, the Dolphins are going about it the hard way, but that's still a possibility if you come out of a bye and beat an Indianapolis Colts team, which has lost some close games, but doesn't look very good. So I think 3-3 is still on the table, and we'll talk about what that means later on in the show. But I think the big overarching things of this game are, number one, really kind of for the first time, other than maybe the Dallas game last year, we've seen Mike McDaniel kind of play that field position, time of possession type of game. There was a 4th and 1. He opted to kick a field goal, get the sure thing on points. There was another 4th and 2 in there earlier in the game. He opted to punt and try and play the field position game. These are things McDaniel hasn't really done in the past, and it's hurt the Dolphins quite a bit. You saw it against Buffalo back in week 2, right before the half. Your defense is playing great. You still got the opportunity to get back in it with another score. You go for it on 4th down, you miss it, and then they hit you for a chunk run for a touchdown. They didn't do that stuff yesterday. Number 2, you saw them commit to running the football. 41 rushing attempts yesterday for nearly 200 yards. You got 193 yards as a team. What is that per carry? 4.7 yards per attempt per carry. And you were able to call a better game, a more simplistic version of the offense where you kept Alec Ingold on the field a lot, the most snaps he's played, maybe as a Dolphin, I'd have to go back and look, but certainly the most this year. And you kept his assignments pretty simple, inside zone. There was ISO, there was lead, there was power, there was trap, there was him kind of wham blocking from, either a wing position or offset or straight from the eye. We haven't seen that stuff a whole bunch. I thought they kept Durham Smythe and Julian Hill's assignments rather simple. Yes, Julian Hill's a penalty machine so far this year, but when he gets his blocks pretty well. Who was it? Ryder McConville did a nice cut-up of Jaylen Wright's game yesterday. Watch Julian Hill. Obviously he has the penalty that wipes out the 37-yard run, but he's in there for a lot of those other reps and does pretty well. I think we saw some of the simple stuff start to be executed better. Unfortunate that it took till week 5 of the regular season to get there, but you liked some of what they saw. And I think, and this kind of goes without saying, you can make the argument about Tyreek Hill, but for my money, when he's out there, Teron Armstead is the best player on this offense. He really adds another element of the game. He's so smart. He's so savvy. He moves pretty effortlessly for a 305-pound tackle and allows you to do a lot of cool stuff in the run game. And Miami just kept pushing the button. And that's something that Mike McDaniel, far too often has strayed from in the past, is just being able to find a concept and ride that concept into points. And you look at the touchdown drive they finally popped off. The final 7 plays in a row of that drive are all runs. You found it, you stuck with it, and lo and behold, you hit pay dirt with an Alec Ingold touchdown. I thought they did a nice job in the passing game of giving Tyler Huntley some easy concepts. Timing's still a little bit off, although, what do you expect after he's been here for, 3 or 4 weeks? Especially throwing to Odell Beckham, who's back with the team for the first time since he's been signed. Made some nice plays on the move. I thought Tyler Huntley kind of showed okay, you've got something here that can be a viable backup. I think there's still a little too much going on. There's still some of the bullshit that Mike McDaniel likes to sprinkle in there. Like, why are you doing a power toss to Jonnu Smith when your two running backs have been crushing it? And, that kind of just reels you back to reality a little bit. Like, there's still a lot of stuff that needs cleaned up on this team. Why are you giving Jonnu Smith just like a straight power toss carry? What would the game have looked like had Devon Achane hadn't gotten knocked out? Hopefully he's okay. But would they have kept trying some of the outside zone stuff that they'd been just beating their head into a wall with the first 4 games of the season up until yesterday? I thought Mostert in his return did a nice job. Jaylen Wright looked really good as kind of a slashing running back who can, show off some speed once he gets to the second level inside. That's an element that's been missing. And not that it's going to be a consistent force, but kind of the one thing that the Dolphins have been good at offensively this year, regardless of who has been at quarterback, has been inside run. And it really regardless of who's carried the rock. You saw Jeff Wilson have some good carries to finish off the Jaguars game in week 1. We've seen Devon Achane do it in the Buffalo game and the Seattle game. You saw Jaylen Wright do it a little bit against Tennessee and then a lot yesterday against New England. That is something. I forget who made this analogy, but might have been Bart Scott. But he talked about when you come to playoff football, you have to be able to be portable. You've got to run the ball and stop the run. And the Dolphins, a good running team last year, that east-west stuff doesn't cut it against the better defenses. The north-south is what you got to do come playoff time when you're playing big boy football. While it hasn't been consistent in terms of the sample size until yesterday, they've shown that they can do that a little bit better. So that's kind of one of the 3 things that they can kind of hang their hat on. I thought the offensive line play was pretty good. You've still had some problems when they've overloaded rushers on Austin Jackson's side. He gave up a sack against Tennessee because they messed up the protection and didn't have any help. Huntley didn't know he had a hot. Yesterday, that was the opposite, where Austin Jackson fanned, thinking he had help inside. He didn't, and there was a free hitter to come in on Huntley for a sack. Little things like that have got to get cleaned up, but that's stuff that, you'd probably expect out of any team with their backup quarterback being in the game who's, been there less than a month. So, offensively, while it isn't pretty, and the scoreline reminds you kind of like a Jimmy Johnson score from like the late 90s. You did the things that you needed to do. You made it ugly. You lived with it. You played through it, and you won the football game. And hopefully that's something that Mike McDaniel and the coaching staff see as something that they can build on, moving forward out of the bye, and something that you can build on, I guess when Tua comes back. I don't think the outside zone stuff is ever going to completely go away because a lot of that is kind of built into your offense to feed into your play action stuff that Tua's been really good at. But I think now you have kind of a new element of inside run that you can use in your play action fakes as well, if we get to that point. So offensively, while it wasn't pretty, it was effective. You ran the ground and pound method and beat New England, and you wore them down at the end. And that huge drive at the end, 7 straight runs to finish it off, was pretty nice to see after, the putrid displays of offense we've seen through the first month and a half of the season. Defensively, and this was something that was interesting, especially since they signed Tyus Bowser, this past Thursday, was that he got to play. And I talked about this a couple weeks ago. Remember last year, we talked about some of the Fangio fixes, moving Van Ginkel back to an edge backer position. Surprise, surprise, he's killing it in Minnesota in an edge backer position. Although the backstory about it, I know Dolphins fans are crushing Chris Grier for not re-signing him. He didn't want to be here. They bought a house in Minnesota before free agency even started. Like, they knew what they were doing. And paying $10 million a year for a fourth guy in your pass rush rotation just isn't good business, despite what people think about the Dolphins front office. Different system as well. Anyway, you moved Van Ginkel out of the off-ball linebacker and back to the edge. You started playing Christian Wilkins and Zach Sealer more. You started using Jaylen Phillips in pass rush games. They didn't quite figure out all of it. They started using David Long more. I think Anthony Weaver kind of figured something out yesterday. Quentin Bell has been a liability the whole season. He played one snap. Duke Riley has been a liability on defense, and we'll talk about him on special teams in a minute. Has been a liability on defense when he's played. He played one snap, the first play of the game, and that was it. You played Sealer and Campbell a little bit more because your backup guys have been liabilities. Things looked a little better in the secondary in terms of run support because you didn't have Jordan Poyer out there. Not by choice, but that's kind of the low-hanging fruit of the next wave of fixes is keeping Jordan Poyer off the field. I would not even keep him on the roster at this point. That said, I guess we can be fair. I said the same thing about Alec Ingold a couple weeks ago. Alec Ingold earned his way back on the roster with yesterday's performance. He was brilliant. And it sounds like you're going to be without Javon Holland with the broken bone in his hand for at least some period of time. So maybe Jordan Poyer can do something, anything of value. We've yet to see it, but maybe it's still in there. But I doubt it. But I think you started to see some fixes. I think you started to see him manufacture some pass rush with Chop Robinson. I think you've started to see him manufacture some of the stuff they were good at last year with some of these stunts in the middle, getting Zach Sealer free, getting Emmanuel Ogbah free. The third down defense has been brilliant going into the Monday Night Football game. The Dolphins' third down defense is the best in the NFL. They're giving up just a conversion on 25.5% of the time. That's tops in the league. That's something you can hang your hat on. You can make the argument about, well, they haven't played good offenses outside of Buffalo. Buffalo was 3 for 9 on third downs. They did the job. I think pass defense as a whole has been pretty good this year. It's 4th in the league in terms of total pass defense. It's tied for 8th in yards per attempt allowed. Both of those marks are better than where they were with Vic Fangio a year ago, although I think there's something to be said about injuries in the secondary last year. But even at the end of the year, when you had Xavier Howard back and you had Jalen Ramsey back, these marks are better so far. And you're doing it with, let's be honest, pretty piss-poor play from your safeties, and that includes Javon Holland. If I'm the general manager, and I'm purposely not naming a name here, but if I'm the Dolphins general manager come next spring, there's no way I can justify an extension for Javon Holland based off the first 5 games of this year. It just hasn't been good enough. Unfortunately, Jordan Poyer's been atrocious. Marcus May wasn't great yesterday, but at least he was around the football. At least he made tackles. At least he supported the run game. Interesting how they divided up his snaps. I think Elijah Campbell, a little bit of a bull in the china shop, but has way more speed than Jordan Poyer does at this point. You might as well just rep him and see what you can get. Hell, at this point, I'd be willing to play Nick Needham over Jordan Poyer. Needham was called up yesterday. So there's some things going on. I think they kind of they split David Long and Anthony Walker snaps. They played 30 apiece. I think Anthony Walker played a little bit more in coverage on third downs. I think that's a fair thing to do. Defensively, you've still got a couple warts. Like, it was interesting yesterday. This is something I talked about in the off season. Was, did Anthony Weaver have like the true 4-3 heavy underfront defense built into the playbook? That's something that's kind of lived in the back pages. It's lived in the appendix of the Ravens playbook, no matter who the D coordinator is, kind of every year since that vaunted 2000 defense when Marvin Lewis was the coordinator. Anthony Weaver busted it out yesterday against a run-heavy Patriots team. And I talked about this when they first signed Calais Campbell. It's because they needed a heavy end to play that closed end position because they had tried Zach Sealer there in OTAs and it didn't go well. They signed Calais Campbell to do that. And, you look at how they lined up yesterday. You had Ogba on the open side, Sealer at 3 technique, Benito Jones at the 1, Campbell as a close, and then Tyus Bowser as a true Sam. For the most part, it worked pretty well when you had Campbell and Sealer on the field. I think the problem you have is Benito Jones is just not a good match for what you're looking to do. And then Deshaun Hand is just too inconsistent. You're playing him too many snaps. If you could live with him in those microdoses like you did last year under Fangio, it can be pretty good. But when he's got to play more and more reps, it gets too wonky. But it's interesting that they showed that, especially now that Jaylen Phillips is done for the year, unfortunately. But an interesting way to kind of manufacture a different front, and you can manufacture some pressures off of that. That being said, this was probably the worst game of the season we've seen for Jordan Brooks and David Long, especially in terms of run fits. Worst run defensive game of the season by far. Gave up, what was it, like almost 8 yards a carry, 7.9 yards a carry. Missed tackles everywhere. You had Emmanuel Ogba a couple times got induced inside and then got pinned because they were pulling people. You pretty much every team has had success running right at Chop Robinson, although he did have a really nice edge set yesterday. And then, of course, Anthony Walker got pinned and they still gave up like a 16-yard run on that play. You're starting to see it with Chop, and, I think you're starting to see some things that work. The run defense reminds me of 2016 when Vance Joseph was our D coordinator. I think Miami was 14th in the league. They were giving up about 115 yards a game. But if you went back and you took out all the runs over 30 yards, their run defense jumps from 14th to 4th. And that kind of feels the same way this year where, it's not that they're consistently just getting blown off the ball 5 yards a pop. It's that they're giving up these 33, the 49, the 41-yard chunk plays that get you all out of whack. Now, some of that's due to just being left out to rot on the field because your offense has been bullshit, the whole season to this point. But that was one of my worries bringing Joe Barry in as the run game coordinator. His units, the 3 years he was the DC in Green Bay, were not good. They were atrocious. And you're kind of seeing that play out because you're kind of morphing this front kind of through 2 or 3 different systems and main front packages that you use. The safeties have been terrible in run support all year. You've got a few splash plays from Javon Holland, but that's about it. Just a lot wrong with the run defense, and you're not so much feeling the sting from losing Christian Wilkins individually, but it'd be nice to have someone who can play through double teams the way he can, because that's one thing that Sealer and Campbell haven't been able to do. Benito Jones is too fat to do, and Deshaun Hand just gets washed too easily. The technique goes away. And then Brandon Pilley, questionable that he should be on a roster at this point. You're going to have to revamp the defensive line room next year, no matter what happens big picture wise. The run fits from the linebackers, not very good. David Long kind of had an uncharacteristically bad game against the run. That's usually where he's strongest at. The bad news is Jordan Brooks was not even that good, and then Anthony Walker was worse than both. Just getting stuck on blocks, not fitting the right gaps, just kind of a mess yesterday. That's something you're going to have to clean up when you play the Colts and Jonathan Taylor in 2 weeks, especially because they have a better run-blocking offensive line than New England does. You gave up 151 yards on 19 attempts. That's bad. That's really bad. All that said, I think Miami's still like 20th in the league in run defense, but it's a far cry from where it was a year ago when you were a top 3 or 4 unit the entire year until the last 2 weeks when all the injuries hit. Special teams, I mean, at this point, there's no justification for Danny Crossman surviving through the bye. Like, the unit has performed poorly enough his entire tenure as a Dolphins assistant, even dating back to when Brian Flores brought him in. You have an assistant special teams coach now. I forget the guy's name, but it's probably time that he gets a promotion and Danny Crossman gets shown the door. That's sort of an accountability thing with Mike McDaniel. It's something to watch over the bye. Like, is he actually going to make a hard administrative decision? We'll see. We'll see. That's an area that he needs to improve upon. You've got more than enough sample size. You know, you've given up the most blocked kicks in the league over the since McDaniel started in 2022. You know, 2 field goals last year, a blocked punt yesterday. You're last in, I believe, last in punt returns. You're in the bottom 5 of kickoff returns. You're in the bottom 7 of both coverage units. Like, enough's enough at this point. It's got to get better. And then what's more is you have one of your special team stalwarts, Duke Riley. He's been awful this year as well. And 3 weeks in a row, you've seen him make some contemptibly stupid play or just have a poor performance issue. You know, 3 weeks ago, he had a roughing unnecessary roughness penalty 40 yards behind a punt when the Seahawks game was kind of within reach scoreboard-wise, even though not realistically. But it's a stupid penalty. It's stupid the way Jalen Ramsey hitting Jacoby Brissett in the face was stupid yesterday. Like, that's the dumb shit that needs to stop. Now, I'll say this. Jalen Ramsey's played 3 pretty solid games in a row. You know, DK Metcalf, whoever he was lined up against Tennessee, they weren't throwing his way. And then he played pretty solid yesterday. He had one gaffe late in the game that cost him, but otherwise was pretty damn good. But the stupid shit has to stop from him. The stupid shit has to stop for Duke Riley, and it should probably end with him getting cut. If you want that accountability, if you want that respect in the locker room, you have to make the hard choice and do it. You had the unnecessary roughness penalty against Seattle. You had him boneheadedly trying to field the punt, and he got bailed out because the Titans player had his pinky finger hit the ball. And then yesterday, the guy blocking Brandon Schooler, who blocked the punt, you guessed it, Duke Riley. Like, there's no way that Channing Tindall or Mo Kamara is worse of a special teams player than Duke Riley at this point. Like, it's bad. That's the kind of shit you've got to clean up through the bye. I know Duke's a popular player in the locker room, but man, he stinks on the field this year. And that if that's your one job is to be good at special teams, and you're not good at special teams, like, what are we doing? What are we doing? And some of these big picture administrative things kind of bounce into the overarching narrative is what happens if this season does go belly up. You know, you're still 2-3. If you lose to the Colts, you're 2-4. You know, you've got a tougher road ahead in October, November, and then especially into December and January. Like, where is this going? You know, is it just a matter of time? You know, is someone lighting the fuse every game in the bomb of Tua Tagovailoa taking a concussion and missing another, well, probably more than a month the next time it happens? Like, you know, it feels like the 60 Minutes watch that you see during the late window on Sunday games just ticking away. Like, that's how it feels. And surprisingly, you know, most Dolphins fans are up in arms about the offensive line. As I've said, you know, that's pretty far down the laundry list of things that are wrong, especially with the offense. But you sort of have this weird kind of parallel narrative. Kind of reminds me of 2021 when, you know, the team started 1-7. Stephen Ross had kind of made up his mind he was going to fire Flores at the end of the year. because of the friction with Tua and because of the Deshaun Watson stuff and not playing nice in the front office with Chris Grier and going through, 4 different offensive line coaches and 3 different offensive coordinators and on and on and on. It kind of feels like that now. Like you have some pretty obvious holes in your roster and your roster construction and how you've built it. I don't think if you're going to have to make a big decision on quarterback, it'd be pretty irresponsible to let Chris Grier be the guy who makes that decision again. He's already pissed away a second-round draft pick on Josh Rosen. He was a consensus guy to get Tua. He didn't have a dog in the fight. You shouldn't give him the opportunity to make another decision. He was general manager when Ryan Tannehill got an extension. Like, none of the moves he's made as a general manager, with respect to the quarterback position, have been great. So you have that kind of lurking. If the product on the field doesn't improve drastically, you're going to lose more games. And at what point does Stephen Ross just say, okay, we've gone backwards. We've paid massive money to Waddle, to Hill, to Jaylen Ramsey, to Tua, and we're getting worse? Like, that shouldn't fly. So you sort of have this undercurrent lurking, befitting a team that is based in the aqua marine environment. But you have this kind of underlying narrative of like, okay, how bad are things going to get? At the same time, you kind of have this hope in the other side of the spectrum where it's like, okay, if you can get to 3-3, none of the teams in the AFC outside of Kansas City and Houston look all that well put together. Obviously Miami's got their own bugaboo issues with Buffalo, but they're certainly not invincible. You saw what happened to Baltimore, who had a hell of a time with Cincinnati, who's bad, who lost to the Raiders, who were worse. Like, outside of Kansas City and outside of Houston, none of these teams in the AFC look complete. You're a game out of the 3 seed right now at 2-3. For as much bullshit as this offense has looked like this year, that's where you're at. So it's kind of an odd situation as far as fandom goes. Like, obviously I'm a fan of the Dolphins. I want them to do well. But is them doing well, like, what's the ceiling of this team as constructed? It feels like it's probably a wild card and done situation, just like it's been the past 2 years. Is it better for the long-term health of the franchise to figure out how bad it is, go belly up, and then rip it down to the studs again with different people in charge? Chris Grier spent how many millions of Stephen Ross's money and hasn't produced a tangible thing as far as, accomplishment by the team. Mike McDaniel, he came in, he vouched for Tua. Tua's his guy. Tua's taking concussions. What's he even going to be like when he gets back? Tua, if you pay attention, kind of notoriously, every time after the bye week, it kind of takes him 2-3 games to kind of click back in. I remember the last time in 2022 when he missed the big chunk of games, you lost 3 in a row. You won that stinker of a rock fight against Pittsburgh on Sunday night. And then you kind of started to see it grow from there. They went to Detroit. Tua played pretty well, and he got things kind of rolling again. I think the problem is your schedule is such that later in the year, you got to start stacking wins and stack them now. You've got to start stacking them now. Although I will say that Cleveland and the Jets games at the end of the year, at least at the moment, don't look as daunting as I thought they once might be. So you're in kind of a weird predicament again, and you're at another inflection point. Like, I think there's fewer wolves outside your door after you got the win in New England, and you can kind of go into the bye, regroup, reassess, hopefully start getting more pieces back. No timetable yet on Bradley Chubb or Isaiah Wynn or River Craycraft, but Cam Smith is close. You got Odell Beckham back. You're looking at week 8 for Tua if all things go well with his appointments this week. Like, if you can crash land this thing to 3-3 and get out of that plane alive and move on, maybe there is more of a chance. And I think that's what makes, football interesting is, you never know which team can get hot and go on a run. Outside of Kansas City, Minnesota, maybe Houston, maybe Detroit, the league's, sort of a box and whisker plot of high and low ends, and the Dolphins are one of the teams in that middle pack right now. They haven't looked like it, but their record-wise says they are. And, just kind of a very anxious time to have a bye week is kind of how I describe it. Like, I don't know that continuing forward with this path is the best path for the long-term health of the franchise, and I think there's a lot of underlying things that are wrong. But I also think that this team has kind of been in this situation before. McDaniel's been in there. Tua's been in there. You've seen them course correct in the past. Can you do it and start to build enough momentum and enough good things? Can you figure out the passing game when Tua gets back? Can you figure out how to incorporate more of the inside running game? Can you tighten up your run defense just a little bit? I'm not asking for top 10, but stretch yourself into the top 15 from where you're at now. Start generating more turnovers. Start generating more manufactured pressure, because you're going to have to without Jaylen Phillips. But there's signs of life there, and there's signs of things that you would want to keep long term. The third down defensive package, your pass defensive package, your inside run game. Those are the 3 things you kind of have to hang your hat on and hope that you can kind of not re-engineer, but restart the engineering on your passing game with Hill and Waddle once you get Tua back. You've got the makings of something that could be good. Is it good enough? I doubt it. But it could be good. And it could at least be entertaining football that's a little easier on the eye than what we've seen. I don't know what the schedule will be like over the bye week. I have talked to Evan Morris, my co-pilot. We may do an episode if he has time. He's up in the Pacific Northwest getting ready to fly E-18G Growlers. So if you get the chance, congratulate Evan on Twitter. But we may do an episode over the bye weekend. I am planning on going to the game against Indy in person. So probably wouldn't record an episode till Monday that week, and then we'll play it from there from then on. So that's going to do it for this episode of Dolphins Talk Weekly. You can follow the show on DolphinsTalk.com, Spotify, iTunes, Podbean, Spreaker, wherever else you get your podcasts. Follow me on Twitter at KevinMD4. And as always, this show is brought to you by Caneswear. Caneswear is the place to go for officially licensed apparel for the Miami Dolphins, Miami Heat, the Hurricanes, Florida Panthers, and all of the professional and college teams in South Florida. Looking for the latest jersey, a birthday gift, or the newest hat to hit the market of your favorite South Florida team? Check out Caneswear for their overwhelming selection of sports apparel. Located at 2655 South University Drive in Davie, Florida, Caneswear has it all. Not in South Florida? No worries. Visit Caneswear.com to shop their inventory from the comfort of your home, and they'll ship to you. International fans too. Caneswear.com is the spot that Miami fans shop. That's Caneswear.com, Caneswear.com.